Good morning and welcome to the first day of your backend journey. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to practice, learn and practice how to build a web API that works with JSON data. That's all we're learning, right? Sounds like, oh, that's pretty simple. Well, along the way, we learn how to actually build that thing using Node.js. And then how can we persist data to a database and a relational database management system. Then we'll learn about security a little bit. How can we secure API, make sure that only people that, or only clients that have access to our API can access some of our data, protected data. And then later, we're going to learn about testing. On that testing week, we'll test not only the backend, but we're also going to kind of go back and talk a little more about React again, as we spend a couple of days testing a React application. We picked a set of tools for everything, right? In the beginning, we picked Node.js and Express. Node.js as the platform to build our API, and then Express is just an NPM module, nothing fancy. That's going to make writing APIs and web servers in general a lot more enjoyable, okay? So that doesn't mean that these are the only tools that you can use to do or to build APIs. It's just we pick a set of tools that are very popular in the community, that have a lot of support, that have been around for a while. So you'll see us, and in some cases, like next week, we talk about relational databases. There are very popular relational databases, but we picked one that gets out of your way and lets you concentrate on learning the basics of working with databases. So along the way, we kind of explain why we picked a particular tool. Trust that if it's not the one that you end up working with, it's fine. We pick the tool that is that's going to make it easier for you to learn the core concepts. Okay. All right. So I'd like to start by looking at Training Kit. And Training Kit has information about introduction to Node.js and Express. You probably watch some of the videos here. I'm going to touch up until about, for the next 4 minutes, touch up on some of the basic stuff. You can read through all of this. Node.js is a platform that you can use to build network applications, and you can use it to build command line applications. Visual Studio Code was built and it runs on Node. Slack, the client that you're using, runs on Node. So you can build native applications with it. There's a lot that you can do with Node. But for us, you can read more about all that on the website. For us, what we care about is there is a way for us to run JavaScript outside of the browser. That's it, right? Just think about it that way. Node lets me run JavaScript outside of the browser. That's it. And then what about this other thing called Express? And there are examples there. You could go through those. Of course, they're on the documentation. What about Express? Well, we're going to we're going to be building APIs, specifically a web API, okay? And that web API is going to receive, because you've done this already on the React, you have used somebody else's server, you send JSON to that server, and the server sends JSON back. So at this point, we understand that you know what JSON is and how it works, okay? And then you can use something like Axios to make a call to a server. You're just going to be on the other side answering the call from the client, and then processing a response that you send back, and that's what you're going to get when you do, you remember that? You do that then, and then inside that response, you have this response that data with some information in it. When you're using Axios on the client, well, you're going to put that data in there on that response. So that's our job. Express is just an NPM module that is going to make building APIs and web applications in general really, really simple, because it's got a clean API. It abstracts away a lot of the security and networking concerns that we would have to know about when working over HTTP. You remember HTTP, right? HTTP is the protocol of the web. It's a stateless protocol, and all of the pages that we visit on the web, all of that traffic goes over HTTP. And when I say a protocol, I mean a set of rules, rules that govern the communication between a client and a server, between 2 points within the network. So that's about it. That's all the theory that we're going to say about that. Express has some core features, mostly routing and middleware. There are convenience helpers and all that, but basically routing and middleware are the core features of Express, and we're going to touch up on those as we use it today. Okay? I have 1 more minute, and then we're going to go into talk about the project for today. Okay, think we're good on all that. Hopefully you have Postman installed because we're going to use it. So all of that is for you to go and practice. Here's the project for today. We asked you to, it says fork and clone, right? So that you can have a copy of it, but you could, that way you could commit to your fork without affecting this. No need to do pull requests. It's just for the guided project today. But I'm assuming that all of you already cloned it. If not, just clone it again. I'm going to drop the link in Slack again, just in case. And I'm going to ask, and this is going to be a theme throughout the day. I'm going to do something like this. Yes, I'm going to ask you a question, right? And then if the answer is yes, like in this case, I'm asking, do you clone the repository? Do you already have it? You do thumbs up. And if not, you do thumbs down. And why do I use that? Well, I can there see if there's anybody that needs to catch up with me. And I will wait as long as it takes. Right? Looks like everyone cloned it. So let's look at it real quick. It's like, oh, there's nothing there. Please follow along, and we build the API step by step. That's it, because this is the project for today. Now, what about the project for the afternoon? Right? That's a different story. So we have this user's API. Look, it says mini. We need to rename that. Oh, ignore that. It says mini. So on this project, font size check. I'll make it a little bigger just in case you have a small laptop, right? Screen. What we hope is that we can go through CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete, or destroy operations today in a simple API, the simplest API that we can build in a couple of hours. That's what we're going to do today to get you introduced to it. Turns out that you will see me using a file that we have just to handle the data for the API. But this one uses a database. So that little file called db.js that you'll find in your project for the afternoon, it's going to have a few methods that you can call. So basically, if you import this as db, you're going to see me kind of do something similar here. Let's say that you call this db, and you say db.find. This is going to return a promise. How do you handle something that returns a promise? If you do an Axios call to somewhere and then you get a promise back, yes, Cecil, very good. We use the bros, right? They're called the bros because they always go together. Then and catch. That then to handle the result when everything is successful, and that catch in case there was an error when trying to access whatever resource we're doing. So every one of those methods that you find in this little file called db.js will return a promise. That means that you have to handle it with then and catch, with the bros, okay? And there's an explanation of what each do. This is as much an exercise of your reading instructions and following them as it is building the API. So make sure that you run to it, because this, for example, this insert says that if you call insert, you pass the user object, it will add it to the database, and it's going to return. Remember, everything is a promise, though. So when the promise resolves, it's going to return an object with the ID of the inserted user. And the object that you get back is going to look like this. So if you inserted user 123, you're going to get ID 123. That's the only thing that you get. And the reason you only get that is because you're going to think out of the box a little bit for some of the exercises, and you're going to take that ID and maybe need to go and make another call to the database to get the rest of the data. But we'll get to that. So your job is, you can run this, you just do in Yarn server, okay? And you can test it using Postman, of course. So you'll be handling users here, and the users have a name and a bio. The name happens to be a string and is required. The bio is not, okay? And then this is here. This is going to get created by the database automatically. It says that it's a date, and it's going to default to the current date. You don't have to add this information manually. The database will add it manually for you. So you only worry about name and bio when testing your API. And then you're going to write some endpoints. What do I mean by an endpoint? This is one of the first things you're going kind of the lingo of working on the back end. Endpoint is just the point of contact between two systems. In our case, would be our server and a client that is connecting to our server. That client could be Postman or could be a React application or a mobile application in Android. The point is that you have two systems communicating with each other. The point of contact where they connect, that's the endpoint. So in the case of an API like ours, what we're building is a RESTful API with, handles JSON. It's going to be the URL that you use to communicate from the client to the API. So get used to me. I could say URL, I could say URI, but normally I will try to say something like, I'm going to try to use the word endpoint. And what I mean by that is, in this case, for instance, if you go to /API/users on the server, that's the endpoint. That's the URL for the endpoint. And then, of course, you'll notice the methods. You might remember those methods from your HTTP week, where you have the methods that translate nicely into CRUD operations, create, update, and destroy operations. So normally you use a post when you're trying to create something, get when you try to read or retrieve information from a server, delete to remove it, and put to update it. So again, this is a rehash of something that you're already seeing, only on the server side. The routing works as you expect. You'll see when we go through this. This only means a parameter that is going to be called ID and is dynamic. Same as routing on the client, fortunately. Very similar. And then, of course, these are the endpoints that you are expected to build as part of the MVP. And this was supposed to happen on this endpoint. So for the first one, you're supposed to create a user using the information sent inside of the body. We'll see how to do that. This returns an array of all the users. This returns the particular user with that ID. This is going to remove the user, and this is going to update it. Okay, and it's going to return the modified document, not the original. But it turns out that in order for you to update, you have to call this update method here that takes two arguments, the ID of the user and the data, the changes. Like if you only want to change the name, you only send the name with the new name, right? The changes only. And then it's going to return a count of updated records. So if the record was updated, you're going to get a count of 1. If not, you're going to get 0, right? So what you get is the count, but then on this requirement here, we're saying that you should be sending back the modified document. Again, that means that after you're successful doing the updating, hint, you probably want to find another method here where you could find something by ID, passing the ID of the user that you just updated. And then get the user back. And once you have that user, then send it back. Okay? Hint. Questions? All right. And then, of course, you have specifications here. I should probably note this, but if you can get to all of the validations today, it's fine. As long as you have the endpoints working, at least with the happy path, which is passing the right data, they all work. But we expect that if you can, you get to the validation before you move into the stretch problems. Well, the stretch problem is just wiring up a React front end to show the list of users. And if you have time, then, deleting and all that using a form. I mean, you've done the React portion. You're just going to connect it to your server now. There are some little instructions here, and this is for you to add something. You'll see what it means after we go through the exercise today. Questions? If not, we're just going to go into writing some code. So again, please tell me if you can read this. If not, I can make it a little bigger. Okay. If at some point it's too small for any of you, please let me know and I'll just increase it a little bit. Oh, a little bigger. There you go. How about there? I want to make sure you can. Yeah? Huh? Cool. All right. Okay. So Here we start. We're gonna do our, little loops where I show you, you watch, ask questions, then I'll let you catch up. So let me walk you through what we have here. All we have here so far is, the package.json. This has some stuff in there. I'm gonna close this. We don't care about it. We don't need it. And then the README, we already saw it. But we have this data thing. You don't have to touch this. All you need to do is follow along with me. Okay. All this has in there is a few functions like the ones that you saw: find by ID, add, remove, update, and this clear. And then this is implemented as a simple in-memory. There is no database here. This is just all in memory. You don't have to touch that. We're going to start at the beginning. Okay. So when you run, and I wanted to show you that, and probably in a different, well, we'll do it later. But when you start a project with Node, you normally do that npm init that you saw in the examples there. And what that's going to produce is a package.json. I just completed it with some stuff. One of the things that I added was this script. This script called server will run a little utility called NodeMon. You're going to learn more about that probably day 4 when we do the first server from scratch. But for now, all you need to know is that if you type yarn or npm run, and then you do server, like so, it's going to try and run the server. It's going to tell me I have nothing to load because it's broken. You don't have anything there. Because I'm talking about this index.js file that does not exist. But what this does, though, if it gives you a nice flow, because every time you make changes, it will restore the server for you. That's what it does. So again, you don't have to touch it. It's already working. All you need to know is that by running yarn server or npm run server, you can run the server. It's a node monitor of whatever files. All right, not daemon, they call it on the Nix world. All right, so you notice that I have this is my server running, but I also open another terminal down here because we'll need some stuff. We said that we're going to use Express, right? So I'm going to start, and again, don't type anything. Don't type anything. Okay. I'm going to start by adding that index.js filing here. And then in here, I'm going to show you, remember, let's say that I wanted to use Axios, right? So if you were using Axios, I would do something like default import of Axios from Axios, right? This is what is called ES6 or ES 2015, if the proper name, modules, right? That means that I could have some JavaScript code in another file, I bring it in so that I could use it and give it a name, and in this case, I'm calling it Axios. This is how you work on React. On Node, though, we have an equivalent. We have a different module system called common.js. So instead of doing that, I would do something like this. Let's say that I want to use Express. I would say, hey, bring me Express, and then require, and in parentheses with string Express. This is equivalent. It's basically the same as, import Express from Express. So that's the same. That's the first thing that is going to be a little different on Node. Okay. All right. So this is going to let me bring in this Express npm module, but I need to install it. So the second step is, well, I'm going to use it. So yarn add Express. Now we're bringing in, it's like installing Axios or any other library. Now we need to create a server. And it's easy. In order to create a server, you can say const server equals, and then using this Express library as a function and invoking it, this creates a new HTTP server, meaning that it's going to listen to traffic over HTTP, like any other web server out there, okay? And in order to turn it on, I mean, we have it, it's there, it's just not listening to any traffic yet, right? We need to tell it, okay, I want you to listen to traffic on my computer or where you are running in a particular port. Do we need to clarify what a computer port is? The answer is yes, of course, right? So any server that you visit on the web, and we'll probably go to this later in more detail, but just think about it this way. When you run your React application that you created with Create React App, you will notice that you visit localhost colon and then 3000. That's the number that they picked. That 3000 after the colon, anytime you see a URL that has colon and a number there, that would be the computer port. And what happens is that computers are so powerful that you could have more than one web application, or more than one server running on the same computer. So what the engineers did is they say, okay, so we're gonna do the same thing that we do with buildings. It's like you could have a house or you could have a building. So think of the computer as a building, and that building has many apartments in it. So in order for you to get to that building, let's say you want to visit my house, my apartment, and I live somewhere in New York. You first need the address to get to the building, but then when you get there, you have 25 apartments. So what do you need to know in order to get to my apartment in that building? You need the apartment number. The port is like the apartment number inside a computer. So the URL is going to get you to the computer. In our case, localhost is going to get you to my computer where I'm working. But then colon and the port means that I could have more than one server running. I just need to have them in different ports, and that's okay. Some ports are special. They are reserved for things like if you want to run a mail server in your computer, you probably use port 25. If you want to run a web server that's going to work from people that are going to access from the outside, you probably use port 80. Some of them are reserved. Some of them are open for us to use as users, okay? 3000 is one of those. I forget the number. I had the number somewhere. But there are a set of ports, a range of ports that we can use. So I need to tell my server now a port min number. Nice, Joe, nice. I'm going to say my server, hey, I want you to listen for traffic. So any request, any client that tries to connect to my server, and they go specifically to the port 4000, I want you to listen to that traffic and do something with it. And I could have here I'm going to have a callback function that I can execute, once somebody connects here. So what I'll do in this callback function is just do a console.log of, this is just a new line. I'm going to say I'm running on port 4000 and a couple of new lines again. Probably just one. Should be enough. So that \n, like so, it's just saying add a new line before you add this message and then add another new line at the end. So this is what we get, right? Look at the terminal now. Now we have this means that the server ran without any errors, and then this console log showed up. You're going to come back. Remember, we're only in these 5 lines of code. So I'm going to give you a minute. So let me show you now. I have Postman here. Postman is running. I'm going to bring it into view. And I'm going to visit here. We have all the HTTP methods here. I'm going to select the get and visit localhost colon for the port. What would be the number here? 4000. Very good. Yeah, see, you guys are paying attention. Everyone's paying attention here. Oh, look at that. What do you mean? What do you mean, I don't have any response on localhost 4000. Do I have? That's wrong. Let's see. That's what I should get. Okay. So this is what we're getting. We're getting this error that says cannot get. If we look at the preview, this is what we would see. Cannot get. And slash is saying, I'm trying to get this route. Like routing, remember, slash is the root of the site. So it's the same as doing localhost slash. By default, it's going to try to do slash. That's the outer, the root route. And it's telling me I cannot find it. And some of you said already, yeah, that's because we don't have anybody listening to traffic on that route. But I want to show you something, though. This is telling me who's sending this answer. Cannot get. What if I go and stop the server, no longer running, and then we do a send again on this? By the way, let me make this a little bigger just in case. Okay, there. Now this is different. This is telling me there is no one listening for traffic on 4000. It's different from cannot get. So by just doing these lines of code, if we start the server again, you'll see that actually our server is doing something. It's trying to handle this request. So it's working. So your job is now follow along, create an index.js file. Of course, you're going to do, yarn to download all the packages. Write that index.js and make sure that you can test it on Postman by doing a get to the URL, and you get that cannot get slash. That would be success for you. And please let me know when you're done. So while you're working on it, I love it if you could answer no, thumbs down, so that I know you're still working, and then you come back when you're done and just answer yes. Excellent. Thank you. We have some fast typers in here. Some people already finished. The text bigger here? Sure. Is it better there, Lena? Since we know that we're just going to be using this index.js file, I could tuck this there and make this even a little bigger. Unless that works for you. Does that work for you there? Cool, perfect. Thanks for letting me know. Just gonna keep this tucked to the right here just to see if anything breaks here on our terminal. All right, let's see. Everyone is there. Perfect. All right. So, no, we have a few. We have 5 people still working on it. So we'll wait. We have time. Definitely have time. All right, one more. This is so different than React. There's no time. Yes, there's time. You'll see. All right. So if we're getting this error that says we cannot get slash, what would be the next natural step? We want to have some kind of response. What should I do next? Let's pretend that you're my boss. Yeah. Write some kind of endpoint that will handle a get request, right? Because it says cannot get, a get request to slash. So here we introduce the concept of, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to say routes, because this is how you, but think of it as the endpoints, okay? So we're gonna introduce the first concept here, a route handler, okay? And it's got a couple of things. We said that Express has some core functionality. One of those is routing, and it's the ability to take and execute, take a URL and an HTTP method, and based on those two things, execute a particular route handler or request handler function. So you're going to write some code. In this case, we have this, we call the server. So I'm going to use server. I'm going to do a get route here. And this is going to be a server that get to slash, and then we have this route handler function. And this route handler function has a request and response parameter, and they can be called anything, right? You could call it request if you want. People just use rec and rest because it's short. But what's important here is that the position matters. The first argument represents the request. It's an object that has information about the request, like data that the client sent. And a lot of helper methods added by Express and Node. The second argument would be the response. And again, this is for you to work with the response that you're going to be sending back to the client. There are a set of helper methods there that you can use to assemble that response. So for this one, of course, it's got to be a hello world, right? So it's got to be that. So we're going to say, hey, when someone does a get to slash, I want, as part of the response, I want to send hello world, like so. Again, this send method is provided. So we could just say, hey, for the response, I want to send this hello world. This is a simple string. Save that. Come back to Postman and do that send again. And we have hello world, right? This is working. Of course, this is a simple string. If you look at it raw, it's just a string. Pretty still string, no matter what you do. So this is just some piece of HTML that you get back. And you have this status code of 200. You might remember the HTTP status code, 500, 400s, 300s, and 200s. By default, if you don't specify a status code, you're going to get a 200 back, saying everything was okay. All right? So your job is go and implement that hello world endpoint and let me know when you're done. .418 is an interesting HTTP status code if you're a teapot. And now you have built a server. Once you're done with this, you already have a server that can answer to GET requests. And you can send information back. That's awesome. I mean, I could wrap this and make it an H1 or an H2 like so. And now that would be proper to HTML instead, because HTML happens to be a simple string. So if I save that, you don't have to do it, right? I'm just going to show you. Now what you get back is this, hello world. And it looks like this now. Instead of the simple string, now it's HTML. Right? Wait for 3, 2. All right. All right. So exercise time for you. I'm gonna make this a little bigger so it's easier to read. But the idea here is you will, let's close this. You'll write an endpoint and it's gonna handle a GET request to /now. Okay. Put this in here. To /now. And it's going to return a string with the current date and time. And let's make it 5 minutes, let's say, and then see a possible implementation of it. 5 minutes. Go. Again, here's the instructions. Handle get to /now, returns a string with the current date and time. See you in 5. I missed that question about the VS Code extension. I'll show you how I do that after the exercise. All right. We're gonna see a possible solution. Of course, like everything in code, you can have who knows how many solutions, okay, for this. So let's do a simple one. Let's say get route. It's gonna be to now. And here I'm gonna just say res.send. And basically, I wanna send whatever is now, right? That's what I wanna do, to send in that. So let's calculate now. Up here, say const now is gonna be equal to a new date object, and then to ISO string. And that's it, okay? I think this is a method though, like so. So I'm taking a new date object, stringifying it to an ISO string, and then just returning that. That should be sufficient. Let's go try it out. So if I duplicate, right-clicking on a tab, I could do duplicate, get a new tab, and then do get to / now. Remember, get, you select the method here, and then this is just simply the URL. And hit send or hit enter. And this is what we get, right? And if we send again, we're gonna get something different every time because it's an ISO string of the date. Cool. Ooh, someone bring moment and everything. Overkill, but pretty nice though, pretty nice. All right. So that's a possible solution for this. Now, the question of how do I do the get route? It's just a snippet. If you go to code, file preferences, where's the preferences thing in my, I can't see it. I'm blind. Oh, there it is. This is the Mac. Sorry, this is not Windows. This is a Mac. So in code preferences, there is this user snippets thing there. So if you're in Windows, I think it's on file preferences. That's what I use. All right. And then you select a language. If you, in my case, I'm using JavaScript. So JavaScript.json, you have one for React too if you want that. JavaScript.json. And then I set up a few prefixes here. I could share this with you. I'm just gonna drop it there. So use whatever works for you. So basically it has a couple of parts. This is what you type and then you hit tab. So if you need, in my case, I'm doing the post get test. I don't have a put route here. Let's create one together here. Like if I wanted to have a put route, I could just say, copy this, call it a put route. So instead of this, what do I want to tap? Maybe put route. And then instead of server.get, that would be server.put. And this is the URL. And then all of these have meaning. There's an explanation to what they do. There's the T is just adding a tab to get indentation. The N is just a new line, like hitting enter. This percentage and the numbers where you want the cursor to stop as you hit tab to it. And percentage, $0 is where that's the last stop. And then you can have $1, $2, 3, 4, if you want to have different stops for your cursor. And of course, this is the description. So this would be for the put. We have the get, the post. Let's do a delete since we're here already. So I'm going to copy this, Shift Alt down to make a copy real quick. Delete. So it's going to be a delete instead. And delete. All right. And then I want to type del route as my text. Can I copy and paste what? I already inserted without the new routes in there. I'm going to insert it again as a snippet. That's what it looks like now. So again, code, preferences, user snippets, pick JavaScript here, JavaScript.json, and just paste that in there. And of course, reading this will let you know how to create your own if you want to have some others. All right. So that's it, no magic. So if I want to have a post route, and then hit tab. That's it. And you see now the cursor stops there, but then since I have the $0 there, once I type something here and hit tab, it will move to the next stop. And this is the last one there. All right, cool. So we have been returning strings, but we know that that's not what we're going to be doing. We're going to be working with JSON. So what do you say we take a 5-minute break, get a coffee, get water, recycle some water, and then we come back at 10 Pacific, and we go for the next hour, and then we start returning JSON instead of just simple strings. So see you in 5. Please, please, please walk away from the computer. Please, 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 right? Because when you come back, we're probably going to be sitting here for the next 50 minutes. So take that break. See you in 5. Are you there, Joshua? Are you there? Are you in Windows? If you're in Windows, it's going to be in File instead of Code. Yeah, Windows is a little different. I use Windows, but for the lectures I use the Mac because everybody else has a Mac here. So yeah. All right. I guess we can come back and write some more code. Yay. So back. This is all well and good, okay? It's pretty nice. Only though that normally APIs return JSON now these days, right? So let's start working with some JSON code, right? So the first one is, just so you know, the data that we have here is about hubs. And think of a hub as just another take on channels, kind of, right? So let's say that you're building a system called Lambda Hubs, and you could create a hub and have conversations in that hub. In this case, we have some hubs for some API lectures, 5 of them. And they have an ID and a name. That's what we care about. There's an ID and a name for each hub. So let's see if we can get that list of hubs. Turns out that we have a find method there that we could use for that. So let's go write watch me write an endpoint, and then you go write it later. So let's get a list. The first one would be, remember that we're going to do some CRUDs here, right? CRUD operations. So let's begin with the R in CRUD, right? Let's do it like this. The R in CRUD. Oh man, this is awful. There you go. Shift Command K to delete that. All right, so let's do a get route to /hubs. We're gonna call it hubs. It could be /API/hubs. Okay, I'm gonna call it hub. Sure. So if I go there, I want to return, but as JSON, not a string. I want to return the collection of hubs. And I know that I need to bring in this db.js file. So the same as using import, we could use requires, and the same rules apply. If you're bringing a library that happens to exist in the Node modules folder, you just use the name. But if it's a custom file that you have on your system that is not an npm module, then you need to use a relative path for it. So I'm going to require db as /, and then going to go inside that data folder because we're in index, right? /data/db.js. You don't need the JS. I like to have it there though. But same as imports, you don't need to specify it if you don't like it. So now I have access to this DB. Now this DB file, I'm going to bring it in here just to show you one more time. It publishes, and we'll learn about how to export and stuff, but it publishes an object. This is what you get back from there that has a hubs property with the methods in there. So if we're going to get to the find inside of our endpoint and get the list of those, remember that this is a promise though. So in here, I'm going to say db.hubs.find. They should return a promise, and then we need the browse. Then and catch to handle our promise. I know some of you mentioned the homies. We call the rec and res, they're the homies. And then in catch, they're the bros, okay? So if executing this is successful, this code is gonna run, and I should be getting back, hopefully, a list of hubs, okay? That's what we should be getting back. If anything fails, then I should be getting an error. Okay, and then we handle it here. We handle the error here. So if we are successful, what would be a nice status code to send to a client if we perform a successful get operation? It would be 200. How can I set the status code of the response? Well, it turns out that we have nice methods that we call in our response object. One of those happens to be status, like so. So I could say status, I want to send it 200. If you don't include that, it's going to be 200 by default, but get into the habit of making it explicit as part of your code. Okay. Now, I could do send and then just send the hubs. That will work. But also, another way of making this explicit is we have this JSON, and from now on, this is what we're going to use. Instead of just doing send, we're going to use JSON. JSON does more than one thing, right? It converts whatever the data is into JSON, but it also going to set some headers. And this is something that you don't have to worry about now. We're going to talk more about headers later. But just know that every time you transmit a message over HTTP, it's got at least two parts. A set of headers is like a JavaScript object with some key value pairs, and then the body of the request, which that's where you send the data. So from now on, when we want to send the response, we're going to make it explicit. We're going to say, hey, API, turn this into JSON and set that header for me. So just so you know, the header sets the content type header. Okay. Again, don't worry about it, but just know that JSON not only converts to the JSON, but also sets that content type header. Now, this should work. What if we have an error? Well, what would be a good status code if we run into an error in our server? That is not the fault of the client. Yeah, we could start by doing 500. So I don't know what happened, but I ran into a problem, and then I'm going to send back the error. Okay. This is something that's going to be different from each API. In the case of our little library there, you get back an error, okay? And this error has a couple of properties in it. The first one is the code, and the second one is the message. So you could potentially do this, right? Instead of sending a 500, you could say error that code. And instead of just sending this, you could say, how about we send an object instead that has some kind of property, maybe success, true, or false in this case. Okay, or maybe something that says, you know, error, true. And this is for the client, so the client can check if error, then do this. If success, this, do that. So let's do success for now. False. And then the message, right? So let's call it message. Again, we're taking advantage that the little DB API that we have for hubs, for this message right here, this method, will send you a nice object back. Instead of just throwing an error and blowing up your application, it's going to send you a nice, but this is going to be different depending on what you're using to access the data, right? Now, another way of writing this is we're going to see something else. We could handle the error, just destructure this code and message. So we're going to keep both. Now, turns out that there is something that happens on the db.js where we are faking errors so that you see the catch in action, okay? So let's go visit this, say, all right, I'd like to duplicate this, right click again, and say this time I'm gonna go with a get to hops, hit enter, and hey, we have data, right? That's the data back as a JSON object. If we hit send a few times, eventually we're gonna run into that. Look at that. Success, false. Too late, try again, right? This is the message that's coming back from the API, from the DB utility there. The way that it's set up though, it's just checking and says if the seconds on the clock of the server are an odd number, I'm gonna send you an error instead. But if it's an even number, then you're gonna get the data. So it's for you to just refresh a few times and you should run into the error so that you know that your API is handling the error correctly and sending back that message. Okay? Your turn. Go. That would be really annoying in the client for sure. This is just for instruction purposes so that you could see the catch in action. That's it. You would only, of course, get an error from your database only when there is an actual error. It's a feature, not a bug. Yes, sir. Right here. Oh, thank you, Leland. That was fast, actually. Pretty nice. I'm gonna go ahead and close this. We don't need this anymore. Have a little more space. You can see the whole thing. All right. Yeah, 4 people still working on it. 2. Oh, that was fast. 1. What's going on? Is everybody finishing now? Hey, no rush. Just get it working. Make sure that you test it, and you get both the error by refreshing a few times and the correct data. All right, good. All right, so now we have that R, at least one of them, right? So let's work on the C on CRUD. What would be a nice HTTP method for this? What would we create? A post route. All right. Let's make it /hops. We're not talking about REST today and what it means to make it RESTful, but just start thinking about your URLs in terms of resources. In the case of this API that we're building, the resource that we're trying to manage is a hub. Okay, so we're going to stay on the same URL. And again, we're not going deep into routing today, but routing makes the decision based on the method and the URL. If you're handling or managing the same resource, the URL should be the same. Like in our case, since we're handling hubs, it is the same URL. What changes is the method. All right, cool. So yeah, we're gonna do a post. Turns out that our little DB also have for hubs a way to add. And you can see we have, oh, it's not showing up there, but there is an add, trust me. There he goes. So there's an add method that we can ask to add hubs to that in-memory array. So in-memory array means, unfortunately, that every time the server resets, you lose the data that you added. But yeah, cool. So you should pass a hub, and remember that a hub has an ID and a name. The cool thing is, though, that we don't have to pass the ID. The little DB library is generating the ID automatically, the same thing that happens on a database most of the time, where the ID gets generated automatically. So ideally, we want to pass a hub. The question is, where are we going to get that hub from? Of course, it's going to return a promise, so we need the... Who are they? We need the bros, right? So for the catch, I'm going to show you a little different now. Instead of just bringing the error, we can destructure that here. We could just say destructure the code and the message out of the error. Okay. And then rest.status, again, it's going to be the code, JSON, the message, as part of an object, right? Success. And then just passing the message. Same thing, only that we're taking the structuring so that we don't have to type that long R dot. So what happens if I'm successful? What should I be getting back out of this API? That's the question. Is it out of this DB utility? And that's going to be different. If you read through your project, what you see that when you do a post, you get something back. You get the ID of the last record that you inserted. This library, though, is going to return a hub. So the whole thing, you get it back. So you'll be getting a hub here, and we can just send it back. Status. What would be a good status code when I'm creating something? Very nice. 201, right? Create it. And then JSON back. And I know, well, let's do a success, true, and send back the hub as part of that message. Let's do the same thing here. Let's do this. Let's do success, true, and then the hubs. Just to be consistent, it's important that you are consistent in the way that you return the data from your API. Now the client can expect that it can always check for this success to see if there was a problem or not. Of course, there is also the status code, but you could go a little deeper and give a little more information if you wanted to. Cool, let's see if this works. If this works, we should be able to add a hub. We just need to pass a name and then check the collection of hubs to see if it was added. And remember that when I refresh, when we add changes and we refresh the server, that data is going to go away, but for testing, it's perfectly fine. So pay a little attention here now. Stop typing if you were. Please don't type. Because I'm going to show you how to add data when you're using Postman to a request. So first, we're going to do a post. We're going to go to hubs. We're going to go into the body, select raw, and never ever forget this. You want to grab JSON from here. So post, body, raw, JSON. And now we can manually assemble our JSON for testing here. We're going to pass a name. Let's call this DB1. And you would expect this works, right? Right? Let's try it. Boom. And we get nope. We're getting hub is not defined. What do you mean it's not defined? I'm sending the data is right there. Okay. So what's going on here? And here we're going to take the moment to introduce another concept. One of the core concepts of Express. Middleware. What happens is that Express doesn't know how to take JSON from the request body and turn it into a JavaScript object. So when we're doing this, we're saying, where's the data? We're not saying where the data is. So we need to do two things here. First, grab the hub from the body of the request. Okay, that's one of the steps. So const hub is going to be equal to reg.body. Since we are sending the body, this is the body of the request, we're just making it an object with a name. This looks like what we need for the hub. So that's the first step. All right, so now we have this. This should work. Well, not quite. So if we go back and we try it, we still get an error, only that this time my API is telling me, hey, you failed. Please provide a name for the hub. And you're like, I'm providing a name. It's right there. So here's the second part of this. Now that we're grabbing the data, we're just not telling Express how to parse it, how to take something that's JSON and turn it into that object. Okay? And for that, we're going to assemble something called middleware. So anywhere here, normally you do the middleware before you start doing your routes, your endpoints. In here, I'm going to add some middleware. And remember, we're doing everything in a single file so that you can have, this is the first day, it's your first introduction to it. As we go forward during the week, we're going to learn how to break this application into different files to make it cleaner and easier to maintain in the future, right? But for now, we're going to have everything on a single file. It's okay. When you assemble your application for the project this afternoon, do everything on a single file. It will work. So middleware is a way for you to teach Express new tricks. Like, I want to teach it how to read JSON data from the body. Turns out that you needed a package before to do that. Now you don't need it anymore because Express has a way of doing it internally. It's called built-in middleware in this case, right? So the way that you use middleware is you say server.use. The way that you use middleware is by doing server.use, and then you pass it the middleware. This case would be express.json. If you see examples that do this, Shift-Alt down to copy it, right? That do this instead, online, it's fine. There is a package called body parser, and then you need to export it and install it. It's an external piece of middleware that does the same thing. It was needed before, it's not needed in the newest versions of Express. It's included out of the box. So you would say, so why do I have to use it explicitly? What if you're building an API that doesn't handle JSON? There's no reason for you to have this code and any possible security vulnerabilities that it may have if you're not going to use it. So the way that Express handles things, it says, I'm going to be as lightweight as possible, but I'm going to give you a way for you to extend the functionality of the library through the use of middleware. So to get this to work, let's do a quick recap before you go and implement it. To make this work, we wrote a post and point to hubs. We grabbed the information from the body, happens to be JSON, and then we call add passing the hub in our DB library. And then, of course, we handle the success and the error. But in order for Express to be able to read JSON and parse it into a JavaScript object that we need, then we needed to add this piece of middleware up here to teach Express how to read JSON. So there you go, add the middleware. You don't need to install it because it's already part of Express in this case. So add the middleware and add the post and point, and let me know when you're done. You probably want to see a demo before we do that. Let me do a demo. So let's, if we go back and check out the hubs, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, API 5, the last one. And we go in here, do a post. And this is what we got back, right? We have a success true. This is the hub, ID of 6. So if we go back and refresh, now we have this new hub created right here. And it's got a created update. It was added automatically by the library, like databases do. And if we add another one, let's say that we want to add DB2, save that, send it, and then refresh. We have 6 and 7. Those are the new ones that were added. So it's safe to go and implement because it works. I don't see questions on the questions thread. There are no questions? Is this really that easy? You don't have any questions? Oh, that's good. You go slow and thoroughly, makes it much easier to follow. Okay, cool, thanks. We try. I normally find that only if you try to like type at the same time, you miss some things. That's when you might have simple questions. But if you're just watching, the questions that you'll have will be a little more harder to answer for me. So what exactly is this body again, right? So this is a little about HTTP, but every HTTP message that you send, remember that when you did this, let me explain it this way because this is already something that you already know. When you did Axios.post, you pass in a URL here, right, as a string, and then the next one would be the data that you're passing. That data is what we call the body of the request. So a request on HTTP, any message on HTTP is going to have, as part of it, a data portion. Only that is called a body. So this right here, this is the body. So when that request comes in, any data that you pass through your client would be on the body of the request. For Postman, though, we happen to have a, where's my post? You happen to have a body here where you could just add some kind of data. In this case, we're adding JSON, so this is why we selected JSON here. So whatever you put here as JSON will be the body on your endpoint. So what does Express JSON middleware handle? All it does, this piece of middleware right here, all it does is teaches Express how to parse JSON from the request.body and turn it into a regular JavaScript object. That's all it does. It doesn't handle the response. It doesn't do anything else. Good question. Very good. So, good one. So what happens if I don't have this? Well, that body would be undefined because Express doesn't know what to do with the data. So what happens is that this would be undefined. So if I want to do this and say console.log, or maybe just, well, let's do console.log. You could run it with a debugger too, and say this is the body, or let's call it hub. And did hub here? I'm going to show up the console.log there. And we comment this out, that would be undefined. Save that. Same post. And this is what we get, hub undefined. Because it doesn't know what to do with it, so it just leaves it empty. Doing this though, it's going to give us a nice JavaScript object that we could work with now. There you go. It's just a simple JavaScript object. Good question, Andrew. Like it. Yeah, the Postman screen. Yeah, of course. So I'm going to do a recap. So when you're doing a post or a put, whenever you want to add data to the body of the request, in this case it's a post, select post, go into the body. See, after you select the URL up here and the method, you have a few things that we're going to go through, especially these headers and this body. For this, you care about the body. This is the data. Select raw and make sure that this is, by default, this is going to be text. This is one of the things that happen to me a lot when I'm doing like the lecture, and then I forget to set this, and then it's not working. So if you see, notice how the colors are different now. It's just plain color. But if we select this to be JSON, it's telling you, yeah, I see that this is JSON now. So post, body, not body down here, but body here, raw, and then select JSON from this drop down and add some valid JSON. And if this is invalid, like if you do a comma here, it will tell you there is a problem. If you make this, you know, like a regular JavaScript object without the quotes, it's gonna tell you. It's always gonna tell you if there are any errors. It's gonna have that red X. So make sure that there are no errors on the validator here before you commit. Oh, it's not Postman. It's that this has to be valid JSON. That's a good question. Why doesn't it work with single quotes? Because this is not JavaScript. And the JSON standard requires that the names of the keys and any strings be wrapped in double quotes, not single quotes. Good point. Good point. Andrew, you got your answer, I hope, on the unparsed. Haha. And this is what we do. Hey, Nathan, are you willing to share your screen for a minute? And then we take a quick look to see what's going on and we work on it together. Yeah. So let me stop my share. Make sure that you can share your screen. Yeah. Take it away. Your show. Okay, this is looking really good there. I don't see any problems here. You see, your request is not being sent for some reason. So it's hanging, right? So let's go back to your code and see where the post is. So 4,000 hops, then catch. Okay. Do we have all the changes saved? Click that button that says cancel request on Postman to the right, please. After, you know, right below loading. Yeah, click that one. And then let's go back to your post and scroll up a little bit. Make sure that you have your use express.json. Oh, see, line express.json is the JSON is a method. You have to invoke it. That's what's going on. See, the middleware is hanging there. So that would be line 9 for you. JSON is a method. So it would be express.json and invoke it as a function. There you go. Try that. Let's try that. Oh yeah, success. Good job. All right, let's see. Anybody else? So we have 3 more people still working on it. If you need help, let us know. Just in case, I'm gonna do it here. So if you still need help, just click no on that last one so that we could go to you and help you out. Let me move this Windows from there. When you work on the exercise, we're trying to set up the class so that it feels as it's really, really simple because it's a small step at a time. Doesn't mean that you're not going to run, you're still going to run into issues when you're working on the project, and it's okay because it's the first time. What is this? Someone's trying to do something with my computer. No, don't do anything. Just so you know, when you go work on the project, this thing you're going to have to go back and reference your code, okay? If it's the first time that you see it, it's okay to not remember, right? Just try to make sure that you kind of understand the concepts that we're treating now, because you always go back and watch the lecture or just go through your code for help as a reminder. Don't be shy. if we have to stop here for the lecture today and continue for the next 25 minutes just helping you understand this, we can do that. Okay. Looks like everyone is good to go. All right. So let's see what's next in our list. Yeah, typos are going to be commas missing, semicolons. Those are a problem. So let's work on the D. What would be a good HTTP method for this? So we have a del route. There you go. /hubs. Haha. And now we introduce a new concept, right? We have seen that we can send data from the client, in this case Postman, to the API. How? How can we send data? What have we learned so far of how to send data? From the client to the API as part of what? The body. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So that's one way that you can send data to the server, by sticking the data as the body of the request. Okay. Another way that you can send data is as part of the parameters on the URL, just like routing. In this case, if I want to do this, you never want to have an endpoint that does a delete to hubs like that unless you want to clear the whole collection. Like if that's what you want to do, fine. But normally, you want to delete a particular resource or a set of resources. In that case, you probably send a filter, some way for you to filter the resources that you want to delete. In our case, we're going to delete one at a time. So the routing works same as the routing on the client. By doing a colon, we say there's going to be a dynamic parameter for the URL, and the name of that parameter is going to be ID. So how do we read it? Well, easy. I can say const the ID. Let's call it hub ID just to give you a different name, but it's the same. It's going to be rec.params, and params is going to be an object that has all of the parameters that you passed, that you define here in the URL, .id. So that's how you read, just by going to rec.params, dot, and whatever name you gave the parameter on the URL. So now that we have this hub ID, we could use that to call our delete on DB. DB.hubs has a remove function that takes an ID. So we pass the hub ID in there. And of course, the rows. Okay, it's going to be very similar. So I'm just going to copy this. And you see how now we're kind of have a lot of duplicated code, kind of, but it's okay. Now, this particular API returns, I'm talking about this utility, will return the deleted object, the deleted hub. So you can do something with it, but I'm going to show you something different because you already know how to send data. What if it's a delete and all you want to have is a success code? Tell me, did you delete it? Send me an HTTP code telling me that it was deleted, but I don't want you to send me data. I don't want to use traffic for that because I'm not going to do anything with that data. Well, turns out that there is a method on the response that you can use. I'm going to put a status code there in a minute, okay, called end. And what that does is it finishes the request and it sends a response back to the client saying, I'm done. So the client knows that the request is complete. Now, what would be a good status code if we're not sending any data back though? Turns out that a common case for that is something called no content. And the code is 204. So you might see in some cases that some APIs will return the deleted object. If you wanted to do that, just make this a 200 and then just JSON the deleted object. But we're going to see a different example of a way where, why you use the traffic if all I want to do is delete it? I just want to know that it was successful. So 204, no content. And that's it. If we run into an error again, we handle the error and send it back with a nice. Notice that I'm not sending new error or anything like that to the client with stack trace. We're sending a nice error that tells the client what happened. Okay, I have to show this on the video because this is pretty cool. Okay, bear with me for 10 seconds. 204 no content. Very nice. I'd like to get one of those for my office. Cool. All right, your turn. Go and implement. Let me know when you're done. There's a typo there. There's actually delete. That's fine. Aha, so all the cat memes are there. Nice. Thanks. I'm gonna keep that for later. All right. So I have a question here for Henry. It says, well, we have a few more. Let me back up a little bit. See the snippets? Yeah, sure. We could do that. Send status. Is it an old method? I don't know. I never used it. So there is a REST that sends status. I would read the documentation on to see what it does, but I don't know out of my head like that. So let's go to expressjs.com. Going to the API reference for 4. Find that on the response. There should be a send status. And now you saw me navigating the documentation. So it's equivalent to this. So it doesn't seem like it's deprecated. So if you only need to send OK without returning any data, I guess you could use that. No problem. Yeah. Good question. Like it. You're exploring. So another one that we have. So Joe, I don't have the answer to a lot of the things that you're going to ask. So you know. So the other question is, so status code returns the area of code that the error is found. So this right here. Now, it's just set the let me show you on Postman. It just says the HTTP status code that the client is going to get to a valid, and you should do that every time you build an endpoint. You want to return the correct HTTP status code. See, the reason the HTTP status codes exist is that the client and the server have an agreement on something. So the client wants to know, hey, could you tell me if, what happened with my request, with the operation that I'm trying to do? And the status code is a nice way of doing that. So if it was successful, you have all the codes within the 200s. 300s if you're doing a redirect on the server. 400 if the client make a mistake, you want to send the 400 error. There are different ones. So it's just a way that the server and the client agree on communicating what happened with the operation. And if we go to MDN HTTP codes, you'll see the valid HTTP status codes that you use, and they have a nice explanation of what they are. This is the one that they mentioned before, the teapot. So let's drop this here just in case, because it's useful, very useful. Hopefully that helps. All you're setting is that number right there, the code, to convey to the client that this is what happened. So what is rec.params.id? Yeah, sure, we can go to that. So we're saying that there's going to be this endpoint on our API that has this dynamic portion of it, just like routing on the client. So how I would use that is I would go to Postman and say, and this is probably why it's kind of fuzzy because we haven't tried it. We'll go here and say, actually, let's just duplicate one. It's easier. Don't save. So let's say we go to this, duplicate this, change this to a delete, and say we have 5, right? On to 5. Let's say that we want to delete number 3 or number 5. We only have 4. So we can do /4 and hit send. And this would be the delete. There is no content. We have the correct status code here. But if we go back to our get, there's no 5 anymore. There's no, oh, deleted the 4, sorry. There's no 4 anymore. So the rec.params.id is going to let us read from the URL that dynamic value right there. In the case of the example on Postman, we made that before. What happens if I do 6? Well, if I do 6, we don't have any 6. So what happens if I do 6? Send is going to tell me 204 no content. Look at that. Why? Well, that's the response that we're getting back to the library, from the library. If we want that to do something else, we need to change it. Does that make a little sense? What you're doing is basically parsing the URL, and every value that corresponds to one of the dynamic routes there is going to be placed in that object. So the difference between send status and end, I've never seen send status used by anyone at all. Normally, you would just set the status and then normally send data if you need it. In this case, end. All end does is finishes the request and send back, because if you do a request and the server doesn't send you anything back, what would happen to the error, I think it was Nathan before, the request stays open until it times out. The client is going to wait a while, and then eventually it's going to give you a timeout error. So it's expecting that it's going to get a response from the server, and just sends a response, says, I'm done. Continue working whatever you were doing. So send status, as we saw in the documentation, since I haven't used it, I cannot really tell you what the exact difference is. This is all we know. So sending that, they say, is the same as you just saying status 500 and then sending the actual code name of the, like the description of the code. That's what it looks like it's doing. All right, so here, whatever name, okay, we're going back. The question is understanding this right here. So rec.params is going to be an object. Okay, that's the first thing. And the keys in the object are going to be the name of the dynamic parameters that you have here. It is exactly the same as routing on the client. Exactly the same. For every dynamic route that you define up here, you're going to have a key inside of that object. So if I have something like this, the ID, and then messages, and then something like message ID, okay, this params object in that case would look like this. It would have an ID of whatever the value is, and it would have a message ID property. So if I pass 234 and 123 by hitting the endpoint slash hubs slash 123 and messages slash 234, that will turn into this. Rec.params will look like that, right? Because it will look at the URL and say, okay, what's supposed to be after hubs, this 123 is supposed to be the ID. And then after messages, there is this 234 that is supposed to be the message ID. So it's going to parse those values from the URL and put them inside of a JavaScript object so they could use it like so. Does that help a little bit? Leanne? Yeah? Cool. Cool, cool. React Router 2.0. Yeah, Joe, I just never use it, so I can't really. All right. So I guess we're only missing the U in CRUD. It would be a combination of two things that we already seen, right? We need to read information from the URL, and we need to read information from the body. So let's go and implement it. Put route. We want to go to hubs.id, right? We want to have the ID. If that's okay, I'm going to remove this just to have working code. But just know that if we had this defined away, you know what it is, right, for the video. Let's type this for a route defined as just because I'm going to give you this code after we're done and give you a zip file with all the code so that you have that comment there explaining what's going on as a reminder. Okay, so we have that put. We need to grab the ID, right? So I'm going to use the structure in here because it's the same as doing that. We could also do this just to get used, because if you may see code that looks like that. So rec.params. So it's basically doing the same thing, just grabbing the ID and putting it into the ID property. And then const, say that we have the changes. They're going to be part of the body, right? That body, okay? So all the changes are in rec.body, and then the ID, we're going to read it from here. We're going to call our database layer, say, hey, database, go into the hubs, and update one. And the first parameter would be the ID. The second would be the changes that you're sending me. And the rows. Okay, again, having a consistent API. In our case, the db.hubs, all of the methods have a consistent API that always return this code and this message for the errors. So when you're building your API, and by API, I mean application programming interface, not a web API like we're building here, right? So whenever someone is using your code, don't make sure that they don't run into any surprises, that everything is consistent for them because they know what to expect. So we're doing this with this little library right there, with the DB library that we wrote. Now here, what do we get back when we do an update? Well, again, this is going to be different. Make sure that you read the instructions, because what you're going to get is going to be different probably from what you get here. Okay. In this case, the library is going to return the updated record. You could call it whatever you want. I'm calling it updated here. Then we're going to say res.status. In this case was 200. Again, making it explicit. And then JSON. Again, we're going to be consistent and send a success true, and then the updated record as part of the data. And you could call it, let's say, hub, or you could call it updated. Just make sure that it's documented on your API, that they know what the name of the property with the data is. Now, there are things that could happen with this. This API is written in such a way, what happens if you don't find a record to update by this ID? What would be the correct response from the API? If you're writing a client, a React application, and you say, hey, I want to update this. And what you get back is, yeah, it was updated. But then you pass it an invalid ID. You want to see a 404. You want the API to tell you, I didn't find it. Please, the ID, I couldn't find anything with that ID, right? So let me show you in the last 5 minutes that turns out, if you go check out the db.js and you look at the update hub, it checks to make sure that it found the ID. And if not, it's going to say, hey, some things like, if you try to update the ID, it's invalid because the database manages that. So it sends you an error saying 400, bad request, you can't really change the ID. But also what happens if you don't find it, right? Provide a valid ID. What if you don't send data, the name? You have to give me a valid ID and it must include the changes. So relying on that, I'm going to write some coding here. I'm going to say, not in here, but in here. Okay, so I'm going to make the call. If I run into an error, the error is going to be there. If not, I'm going to check here. I'm going to say, did I actually get an updated object? That means, did you actually find it and changed it? And if you did, then I'm going to send you that. Okay, that's fine. But if you didn't, though, that means something happened. You didn't find it. It was not an error, but you didn't find it. So here I'm going to say status 404. Again, that was not an error. The operation was performed correctly on the server. Nothing broke on the server. So we're not going to catch it as an error. We're going to catch it as, okay, we try to do what you did, what you said you wanted to do, but we couldn't do it, and here's the reason why, okay? And then I can pass a message. I cannot find the hub you are looking for. These are not the droids you're looking for. So I don't have to do double quotes, okay? Again, the reason I can do this is because the library that we're using, this db.hubs method, returns falsy if you can't find it. I think it returns null. I don't remember, but it returns falsy. So let's go try it out. Let's see if we can make this work. All right, so let's take this pose, duplicate this, make it a put, because that way we have data on the body already. It's already configured. So let's take our get to hubs and update this one to be db1. So ID number 5. Go into the put, say I want to change the ID number 5, and the name is going to be db1 instead. And that, and we got ID 5, and the name now is db1. Yay, success. Let's see if it's true by checking our list. Oh, it's going to be annoying. There you go. All right, so you got updated. But what if I try to update something with an ID of, I don't know, 50 instead? If we send that, then we get, hey, I cannot find the hub you're looking for, which is expected. What if I try to update number 5 again, but pass an ID? One of the limitations of the library is saying you should not be able to change the ID because the database is handling that. So if we do this, you can touch this, right? The ID cannot be changed. What if we omit the name altogether? Do names, for instance. Send that, and then it's going, hey, did you change your mind? Please provide a valid ID. And instead of changes that include the name, the valid ID is for the URL, and the changes must include the name. So basically, our little library on the back end is going to give us the correct error depending on what happens. We just need to write our endpoint to take advantage of that. Okay. So going back, we change this to be now DB4. Send back. Check. Number 5 should be now DB4. So everything works fine. I'm not going to ask you to write it because we're already at the time. Okay. But I'm going to give you this code. So you will have a zip file with all this code. And now you have implemented on this server all of the operations. All you have to do now is make sure that you read through the project, because the db.hubs that we have here works differently there. So make sure that you can use that. And remember, if one of the requirements says you should return the updated, or you should return the deleted, or you should return an object, but what you're getting back is an ID, nothing is stopping you from saying, you know, go on delete it, or go on update it, for instance, in here, right? Let's go on update it. And then in here, make another call to the same library. Say, give me the user by ID with this ID that I got, the same ID that you got, and then return that. So you can nest a promise, another calling here with another then and catch, nested promise inside of a promise. So nested promises, that's the thing. You can do that. Questions? So I have one. Yeah, the database logic is going to be different, right? We're just taking advantage of this library giving us that information, giving us that if you cannot find it by the update, it's just going to return null, I think it is. It's a false value, so we could take advantage of that. In the case of the other library, what you get is the count. So this would be the count, and you could check if the count is greater than 0, or if there is a count, because 0 is a false value too, and do the same thing for the 404. All right, so one last question I had in there is, again, how do we do the snippets? On a Mac, it would be on code. In Windows, it would be a file, but you find the preferences, user snippets, JavaScript, and then the question was actually, can you show me your snippets again? Here they are. I'm going to post them again just in case. So the prefix is what you type, and then you hit tab, and then it's gonna, like for instance, like an example, last 1 minute, that's it. So if I wanted to get a default import up here, I could just say dim tab, and then type my, let's say, express tab from express tab, and it will be the end. If I want to have a name the import, I have nim, and I would say something like foo from var. That will let me destructure something as I bring it in. And then for the require is rem express require express. And you can change it if you want. If not, if it's the same name, you're done. Just hit tab and you're done. Then the other ones that you saw there, post route, get route, they're all there. Use wherever you want. And you could change it if you want to be a little different. So can we do something similar for the delete, like check for a 404? I don't think that's implemented on the library, because the point of a delete is removing something. So the result of not finding it or finding it and removing it is the same. It's no longer there for the client. But yeah, you could definitely implement that on the database and say, and have a 404 saying you try to delete something that doesn't exist in the server. If that's something that you care about, you could definitely implement it for sure. So the other question is, can that logic be in the routes? Well, yes, it can be in the route. We are actually doing the 404. We're doing that on the route. We're checking, but we're taking advantage of the return that we get from the library. Don't get caught up on this is returning null or whatever, because this is going to be different depending on what you're using for the data ultimately. What you need to adjust your code to say, okay, what would happen with this database, whatever I'm using to access the database, what would happen if I pass an invalid ID? What do they do? In the case of the project in the afternoon, it returns 0. Okay. In the case of this library, it will return null, I think it is. So you just check against that. But the code for the 404 is actually in our endpoint. All right, that's it for me. Went a little over time. Go have lunch, take a break, and start working on that project in the afternoon. And I'll drop this on the, do we have a Notepad channel? Yep. So I'll drop the zip file with this code on the Notepad channel. So see you on Slack.